There we are. Welcome, everyone, to the October seminar in the D'Anoia Institute of Philosophy seminar series. Just setting up the speakers here, or the speaker view here for the video. My name is Nevin Kleimenhage. I'm a senior research fellow here at D'Anoia and the organizer of our seminar series. Australian Catholic University established the D'Anoia Institute of Philosophy in April 2019 to build a world-leading research center in analytic philosophy. Our name comes from the Greek word dianoia, which means thought, and is used by Plato in the Republic to denote the reflective and discursive reasoning that leads from mere opinion, or doxa, to knowledge or understanding, nous. This year, we launched our online seminar series in philosophy, showcasing research by leading philosophers around the world. A few notes before we begin our seminar. This event is being recorded, and it will be put on our website after the seminar. Dr. Weatherson's talk will go for about 45 minutes, and then we will have about an hour for Q&A. If you have a question that you would like to ask in the Q&A, please message me directly and I will add you to the queue. Finally, it is our custom at Australian Catholic University to give an acknowledgement of country. We commence our meeting by acknowledging the First Peoples and the traditional custodians of the country where D'Anoia is located, the Wurundjeri peoples from the Kulin Nation. We respectfully acknowledge their elders past and present, and remember that they have passed on their wisdom to us in various ways. Let us hold this in trust as we work together and serve our communities. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Brian Weatherson is the Marshall Weinberg Professor of Philosophy at the University of Michigan. He works in epistemology, philosophy of language, decision theory, and ethics, with a focus on issues at the intersection of traditional and formal philosophy. His talk for us today is entitled Indecisive Decision Theory. All right, over to you, Brian.
Very much. Very glad to be here in some sense of here. So the plan for today's talk is to argue that the right decision theory should be indecisive, that decision theory can't do some of the things we might have wanted it to do, namely to give an answer to all of the decision problems we have. To be slightly more precise about this, that I'll be a bit more precise in just a second, if I can turn the screen sharing back on. Sorry, it was screen sharing a second ago. So here's what I mean by saying a decision theory is decisive. What I'm going to be doing is arguing this is false. If for any decision problem, the theory says there's either one thing you should do, and that's what you have to do, or it says there's a bunch of things you can do, and any one of them is equally good as any other. And I'm going to argue that the right theory is indecisive, that it says that sometimes neither of these things obtain. The argument for this is going to be a little bit indirect. I'm not going to give you an example and say, isn't it obvious you should be indecisive about this case? But to give you an example of why you might want an indecisive theory, think about the kind of problems involving super predictors that have been central to one of the two big strands in decision theory for the last 40 or 50 years.
Have you tried to show your screen already? Because it's not showing it to us. It's just saying Brian Weatherson has started screen sharing.
It's not. That is not good. It's showing on mine. What do I have to do? I wonder. Screen. Does that make it work?
No, still not seeing it.
This isn't going to be good. Wow, it was. It works when we do the test and not.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Do you want to turn it off and on again?
Maybe. Let's try stopping and restarting the ship. Okay. Oops. I should have been watching the chat. Okay. Let me try all this again. Share.
Yeah, so it says Brian Weatherson has started screen sharing. When I start screen sharing, I see an option to like do computer or different tabs that I have open, different windows that I have open.
Did that make a difference?
Nope.
this is going to be exciting. What should we do? What should we do? What should we do? Wow. Wonder if I can. Because this really is showing on mine. This is not what I expected. Oh, wow, the cat's now playing with the light switches. How can I do this? Maybe we will just be talking for a bit. It wasn't going to be a ton of things.
If you send me the slides, I could operate them.
It's not really slides. The hope was I'd be able to set up a little whiteboard and I'd be able to scribble on it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It was the high-tech plan, very, very high-tech plan I had. And as I said, I had it. I'm a bit shocked because it actually is, it's mirroring onto my computer, but not from where you are.
Could we make Brian a host of the meeting?
Yeah, I can do that. I don't know that it'll make a difference, but I will do that. Make co-host. Do you want to, if you yeah, if you started again, if you tell me what you are seeing, I can try to troubleshoot.
Right, so I'm doing this. Well, maybe we would just use the whiteboard in Zoom if I have to do that.
Yeah, you can do that too. That's also an option. Yeah, so it says Brian Weatherson has started screen sharing. We're seeing the same screen.
Yeah. And do you see anything now?
Nope.
All right, we have to do something different.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have to do something different. Let me just, so let's, here's a little fallback plan. If people want to see the more written details, I've put a link to the HTML version of the paper in the chat. So some of the things, anything that was going to have been quoted is going to be appearing there in the chat, and I'll try and keep roughly up to where we're going through. And I guess I won't be scribbling on screens, so that's going to be okay. So let's sort of just talk through it then.
Are you able to share the Zoom or to share the whiteboard, or was that? Did you? Well.
No. Well, it's yeah. Anyway, now this will take too long to try and do troubleshooting for what it's worth. It'll be okay. I can work all this through. I might use the whiteboard feature within Zoom, which is what I did when teaching when other things didn't work.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Before that, where was I? Oh yes. So this is the thesis statement for the talk. The right decision theory is indecisive. It's not going to give you an answer for what to do in a whole lot of problems. They might have thought, well, that's kind of obvious. Lots of times decision theory will tell you some options are tied, but I mean it to be indecisive in a stronger sense than that. Sometimes it won't even tell you that the various options are equally good. It'll just tell you that they are permissible choices. If you want a sort of idea for what kind of problem that might get to, and I'm going to stress this isn't going to be sort of central to the argument. Think about the kind of decision problems that have been the focus of decision theory for the last 40 or 50 years, where there is a super predictor who predicts your decisions with super high accuracy, and the outcome is a product of your choice and the choice of the predictor. So to use our little fancy on Zoom whiteboard, this one I hope should work. Is this now looking like there's something you can see on this?
It still says Brian Weatherson has started screen sharing.
What? Okay, now I'm completely puzzled about what's going on.
Brian, do you want to try leaving the meeting and coming back in? Because it was working when you started the meeting.
It was working when I started the meeting. Oh, I don't know. Now let me just talk. That's fine. This is all. It's not worth the hassle.
Okay.
Oh, there was that. Oh yeah. So you're probably familiar with Newcomb problem cases. Newcomb problem cases are ones where you make a choice. It's usually called one box or two box, but let's just call the choices A and B. And the daemon predicts. There's a predictor who predicts your choices, predicts A or B, and the prediction, sorry, how much you get is, well, you get, if you choose option B, which we'll call, sorry, I've got off flummoxed by this lack of tech. Call option A what's familiarly called the one box option, and call option B the two box option. Then what you get is, the familiar numbers. You get $1 million if you choose A and the demon predicts A. You get nothing if you choose A and the demon predicts B. You get $1 million and 1,000 if you choose B and the demon predicts A. And you get 1,000 if the demon predicts B and you predict B. We can have that structure, that sort of 2x2 structure, applied to a whole lot of cases involving predictors, even when with all different kinds of numbers. And what I'm particularly going to be interested in are cases where there are multiple equilibria. So one of the things about Newcomb's problem is that if you choose the one box option, option A in the little story I just gave you, then it's a somewhat self-undermining choice in the following sense. If you think the demon has predicted you correctly, you'll wish you did something else. You'll in fact wish you did option B. And part of the thing about Newcomb's problem is that either way you'll wish you did option B, but let's not actually stress that part yet. What's crucial for now is that it's a case where one of these is not an equilibrium. But it's easy enough to come up with problems where both of the choices are equilibrium, where if you predict A, and you'll hope that the demon has, whereas if you think the demon's predicted A, you'll have wanted to choose A. And if you think the demon's predicted B, you'll have wanted to choose B. So in these cases, I'm going to say it's going to be best to either choice is going to be permissible. That's where we're going to be going. Okay, can we do this without any kind of text-based background? Okay, so imagine the following kind of game, and let's use the chat as our options, as our way of writing down the details of it, so you can at least see where I'm going with. So imagine the following kind of game. The stakes here are going to be a bit lower than normal. If you choose option A and the demon predicts A, you get $6. I'm going to put all this in the chat so you can follow it along. If you choose A and the demon predicts B, you get nothing. If you choose B and the demon predicts A, you get $3. And if you choose B and the demon predicts B, you get $4. Okay, that's just worth sort of thinking through about what you might, if you like to sort of trading intuitions about cases like this, it's a fun little one to sort of test your intuitions on to start with. Here's a couple of things to note about this. Actually, here's several things to note about this. One is that both choices are self-verifying. If you choose option A, you'll think to yourself, well, the demon's probably going to have picked option A. And if the demon's picked option A, then I can get $6 for what I'm doing and $3 the other way. So I'm better off doing what I'm doing. And also, if you choose option B, you'll think, wow, I chose B, the demon's really good at prediction, so I'm better off sticking with what I chose. Right? So both of the choices are self-verifying. Second thing to say about this problem, one of these is sort of self-verifying at a better position than the other. If you choose A, you think you're probably going to end up with $6. If you choose B, you think you'll probably end up with $4. But third thing to say about this problem, and what makes it particularly striking, makes you think to yourself, I don't know how the demon's going to be at predicting. It could, after all, both of these choices seem pretty good ones to me. In fact, Brian's about to tell me they're both acceptable choices. So maybe the demon, I don't know, maybe the demon's going to flip a coin or something. And note that the first two numbers I put there, 6 and 0, add up to less than the second two numbers, like 3 plus 4 is 7. But if you thought the demon was coin flipping, which they're not, by the way, but if you thought that, you would prefer option B to option A. Or here's a completely equivalent way to put that. If you choose option A, you'll think to yourself, good for me, I chose something $3 better than what I could have got. But if you choose option B, you'll think to yourself, good for me, I chose something $4 better than what I could have chosen. So there's a couple of ways to sort of talk yourself into thinking option B is the better choice as well. That's okay. I think all of these are good reasons, and I think it's totally fine to choose either of them. But that's going to be the kind of case I want to try and convince you either choice is permissible. Where are we at? Okay, a few bits of background before we get to the core argument. I said I'm arguing here against all theories that say there's a uniquely right thing to do in these cases, or that at worst they're tied. That covers a pretty huge range of theories. Any theory that says, given a decision problem like this one, we can come up with a numerical value of each of the choices, and then the rational chooser will maximize that value. And any theory with that structure will be a decisive theory in my sense, because it will tell you that either there's one thing that's got the highest number, or it'll tell you that a bunch of them are equally good. But while that's a sufficient condition for being decisive, it's not necessary. A whole bunch of interesting decisive theories do not have that structure and are still decisive. Also, while there are a few interesting theories in the literature that are indecisive when there are 3 or more options, for sort of roughly Arrow's theorem type reasons, but are always decisive when there's only 2 options. And so note that I'm trying to argue here that in cases just like the one I put in the chat, you can make either choice. And so my targets here, what I call in the paper theories that are decisive over binary choices, is a bit of a wider range. A couple more things to sort of a setup. I've said that I've used a few times this notion of some choices being tied. I said my theory is that in cases like the puzzle, like the game in the chat, both A and B are permissible choices, and they're not tied. What do I mean by that last thing? I mean, if all it is for something to be tied is for them both to be permissible, then I'd have contradicted myself. So I must mean something else. What I mean is something that I take from work of Ruth Chang. Say 2 options are tied if they're both permissible choices, and if you sweetened one of them, if you gave someone a small reward for choosing that one external to the game, it would become the best choice. So for instance, in this game, if A and B were tied, then if someone else came along and said, hey, whatever happens in the game, if you choose A, I'll give you 10 cents extra. That should be enough to make A a better choice. And similarly, if someone came along and said, whatever happens in the game, if you choose B, I'll give you 10 cents extra. That should make B the better choice. I reckon even if people came along with either of those offers, you would still be permitted to choose either option. So that's what I mean by them by these choices not being tied. They're both permissible, and they would stay both being permissible if someone gave you a small bonus to choose one or the other. Last technical point to add to all this. I said it at the start that I think there are decision problems where there are multiple permissible choices that aren't tied, but that requires a notion of what it is for something to be a decision problem. I'm not actually sure there is a consensus in the literature on what it takes for something to actually be a well-formed decision problem. So, I'm sort of hoping that the hand-wavy thing I said so far with, hey, there's a demon, they're really good at predicting, here's what they might predict, here are the payoffs, that's a decision problem. But actually, that's perhaps not obvious. So here's more precisely what I mean by a decision problem. It's something that specifies the following 4 things. It specifies what choices the players have. So in this case, those choices are A and B. It specifies what possible states of the world there are. In this case, that are that the demons predicted A or the demons predicted B. And these states are understood to be causally isolated from at least the player's choices can't make a causal contribution to the states. The setup of the problem specifies the probability of being in each state conditional on the choices you made. So note that when I set up that problem for you, I didn't tell you that it's 60% likely that the demon chose A and 40% likely the demon chose B. What I told you, what I hand waved at, was that conditional on either choice you make, the probability that the daemon will have correctly predicted it is really high. So the probabilities we're going to set in specifying a problem are conditional probabilities of states given choices. And in this case, you can think of them as being like probability close to 1 that it'll be correct and probability close to 0 it'll be incorrect. And finally, the problem specifies the returns for each pair of a choice in a state. That's the 6, the 0, the 3, and the 4. All right. Any clarifications people want at this point after sort of all that before I sort of actually get to the argument? No? Okay, so let's dive into the argument. So what I want to do is talk a bit more about this game that I just put into the chat, but with the following addition to it. The game I most care about comes in 2 stages. In stage 1, the daemon decides whether they're going to play the game or not. And in stage 2, you play this game. Why might the daemon decide not to play or not play? Well, the daemon in my version of the game gets the following payouts. This idea that you should think of the daemon as someone who's like making rational choices and getting payment, getting sort of payouts, I think is a very helpful one to associate with a lot of these problems. It's a 1986 paper by William Harper points out that it's a helpful way to think about the original Newcomb problem this way. So let me add in what the daemon's going to get. If the daemon opts out, so if the daemon opts out, you get $100. Right? So this is all much higher than you possibly could have got playing the game, and the daemon only gets $1. If the daemon I can't tell. If the daemon correctly predicts that you'll choose A, the daemon gets $4. Oops, I didn't cut and paste. Correctly predicts. The daemon gets $1, and okay, so here's the structure of our game so far. We're going to play the daemon's going to choose, and the choice will be publicly announced whether they're going to play or not. If the daemon takes one look at you and says, "I don't want to do it," you'll be given $100, and the daemon will walk over the dollar. If the daemon does decide they want to play, you'll play that game I just mentioned. The daemon will get rewarded for a correct prediction and get nothing for an incorrect prediction. And the daemon's really good, so they want to make correct predictions. But note that they'll get more for one reason or the other. That's going to be the payoff. One sort of thing to add that'll be a bit crucial. You might notice that there are 2 ways in the game for the daemon to get $1. The daemon could get $1 by either opting out or by correctly predicting that you chose B. So if I told you that the daemon is sort of rational and likes money, but I haven't actually told you enough to know what the daemon's going to do, because if the daemon looks at you and thinks they're going to choose option B, then the daemon will then we don't know what the daemon will do because they will get $1 either way. So let's remove that ambiguity. The daemon in that case will flip a coin. Right? So if the daemon hasn't decided whether to opt in or opt out, and the daemon is looking at you and thinking, I bet they're going to choose option B, then what the daemon will do in that case is flip a coin and say, heads, I will opt in and play the game, get $1 that way. Tails, I will opt out and get $1 that way. Obviously, you would much prefer tails. You get $100 rather than $4, but that's the game. Okay. Everyone understood the sort of structure so far. There's still only going to be one choice for the human to make. The daemon has now sort of got a few different decisions to go through. So what I want to do in this game is think about 2 different humans who have equal backgrounds, equal dispositions, equal loves of money and not money, whatever. Both of them are going to play the game. But one of them, who we'll call Actually, in that I was taking, I should have been all up to date and have character names from Squid Game, but in fact, I'm really out of date. So I've got characters from Money Heist, so that my characters are all named after cities, and so my two players are named Amsterdam and Brussels. Amsterdam is just going to play the game I just described to you. They're going to sort of wait for the demon to opt in or out. They're going to cross their fingers and hope the demon opts out, and if the demon opts in, they'll make a choice between A and B. But a second player, who I'll call Brussels, is busy. They have to run off to go get their second vaccine dose or something. And so what we're going to do is ask them, look, if the demon opts out, you'll get your $100. If the demon opts in, can you just write in this envelope what you plan to do in that, should that come about? And then if the demon opts in, we'll wait for the demon to make their prediction, then open up the envelope, and that'll show what you get. Right. So the only difference between these two is, do they make this one decision they have to make before or after hearing what the demon chose? Here's what I think here's going to be the basically one and only premise of the argument I want to give. I'll sort of write the short version in the chat, and I'll say the longer version more precisely, but these people should make the same choice. More precisely, if there's a uniquely rational choice for one of them to make, it's the same choice as the uniquely rational choice for the other one of them to make. Right? Why do I think that? Well, three reasons, actually. Reason one, at risk of sort of this might end up sounding like the most question-begging of the lot, but we'll start with it. I think I just described two ways of saying more or less the same problem to you. I think the person who is asked, if this happens, what do you want to do? And the person who's told, hey, this just happened, what do you want to do? Are facing intuitively the same question. The way that the person should answer that question, should answer the conditional question, if the demon opts in, what do you want to do? Should be to imagine the demon opting in and then figuring out what they want to do. At the very least, that should be a permissible way for them to answer that question. So I think at some level, it's just intuitive that whether or not you're told the demon has yet opted in shouldn't make a difference to the choice you have to make. Remembering that the choice only matters if the demon actually opts in, right? All I'm asking the person to do is to say, if the demon opts in, what do you want to do? So that's argument one. There's going to be three arguments for this thing that's written as core premise in the chat. Argument two. Assume you think, as a bunch of philosophers do, that Amsterdam, the person who plays the game normally, waits to see what the demon does, so forth, should choose option A if the demon opts in. But Brussels, the one who has to run off to the vaccine shot, should choose option B beforehand. We'll sort of get in a bit to why a lot of philosophers are committed to that pair. That violates a very plausible principle of reasoning, an instance of a plausible principle of reasoning called the sure thing principle. So here's what's going on for that person. At the start of the game, when they think what to do, they think, I should choose option B. But they think that option A would be better if the demon opts in. And if it's better, that means it's at least as good. And they think B would be at least as good as A if the demon opts in. They think B would be at least as good as A if the demon doesn't opt in. But then if you think X is at least as good as Y given P, and you think X is at least as good as Y given not P, a lot of us think that should sort of settle the matter. That's enough to say X is at least as good as Y. But the person who thinks there's a uniquely rational choice for these two people, and it's a different one for the different people, violates that constraint. Third argument. Again, imagine you think that if the demon opts in, you'll say A, but if the demon doesn't opt in, you'll say B. And if the demon opts out, you won't actually care. then assuming you think there's a non-zero probability of the demon opting in, you should think, right now you don't want to know what the demon did. You think that you will undermine your own interests if you act in the presence of more information. That's kind of bad. I think we shouldn't like decision theories that say that decision makers in some circumstances should sort of put their fingers in their ear and shut out information and try and act before the information comes in. Right. So those are the three little arguments for this thing called core premise in the here. All right. The next bit of the talk, and so where we're up to, if you're sort of following along on the long talk, is we're up to sort of the section called early and late choices, which actually might be a little helpful to, if I can put it. We're up to this part of the talk, this part of the paper, if you wanted to follow along. Okay, what I want to now argue is that what I go on to argue in the paper is that every possible decisive decision theory violates what I call the core premise. I'm not going to run through that full argument here because it turns out that there's some slightly messy edge cases that I couldn't really present with a whiteboard, and I certainly can't present without one. What I will go through is the argument that all the plausible decision theory, all the plausible decisive theories violate the core premise, and you'll have to take my word for it that the implausible ones do so as well. So why do they violate the core premise? Well, think about decision problems that have the following kind of structure. Did that screenshot turn up in the chat? So think about that thing that I just put into the chat. As I'm trying to like fly through the low tech way. This is like a maximally abstract representation of a 2x2 game where your choices are, in this case, they're called G and H for reasons that'll become clear in a second. And the predictor's choices are called PG for predict G and PH for predict H. So think about like that is, so all you need from that is what the X's, Y's, Z's, and W's are. And think about the class of decision problems that satisfy the following four constraints. I wonder if this is going to be easier to do as a screenshot or just type them in. I might type them in. I might do both. So here are the constraints I want you to think about. For these games. Can I do these?
I can type this in the chat if you want to keep talking, Brian. I've got the screen.
Yeah, maybe could you type it into the chat? That'd be great. Okay. So what those constraints tell us is sort of like what I was talking about earlier about the 6-0-3-4 game, that both G and H are equilibria, that H is I flipped G and H and A and B around, haven't I? That H is a better equilibria than G, but G is a safer equilibria than H. The way I set up that example was by starting with a bit of game theory and converting it back in. Turns out there's actually quite a lot you can do in decision theory by just starting with some textbook game theory and imagining the game as being played between you and a Newcomb-like predictor. If you start with prisoner's dilemma and you think about things this way, you get the original Newcomb's problem. If you start with the game theory is called matching pennies, and you think the other person's a predictor, you get the death in Damascus example from Gibbon and Harper. If you start with Battle of the Sexes in game theory, and you think the other person is not your partner, but in fact a demonic predictor, you get read Richter's asymmetric death in Damascus problem. If you start with Chicken, the game based on the sort of end of that James Dean movie, and think that the person in the other car is a demonic predictor, you get Andy Egan's psychopath button game. Well, the game, what you get here is the game you get if you start with what's called Stag Hunt. And Stag Hunt is based on this, I'm not sure how plausible the basing is, but it's based on this example from Rousseau, where Rousseau is sort of imagining some people who have to decide whether to act individualistically or cooperatively. But unlike in Prisoner's Dilemma, he doesn't think that they're throwing away money if they're cooperating. In fact, he thinks if they cooperate, they'll all be best off. But what's striking, and so cooperating is, in Rousseau's example, they've got to choose whether to go hunting rabbit or hunting stag. I think I've changed it to G for gathering berries versus hunting stag. And the bit of and God only knows if this is a plausible bit of anthropology. I think it's actually, Rousseau's actually right about this one for once. The background theory is supposed to be that you'll all be best off if you're all joining the big team cooperative effort. But if the team effort is like half-hearted and only some people join in and the others don't, the people who join in are going to starve, because you can't hunt successfully, at least using the technology you've got available to you, without having a lot of people involved. But I said Rousseau was, as you probably know, was kind of making up all the historical anthropology as he went along. But I gather on this one he's actually kind of right. There's this like there's this phenomenal story I was recently reading about a dig that some people did out in Colorado just a little while ago that seemed that if they figured out what was going on right, it was what they excavated was basically a giant trap that must have been sort of set up by at least dozens, maybe hundreds of people to like steer a herd of buffalo through what looks like, a human-built Rube Goldberg machine until the buffalo end up in some narrow spot where they can kill all the buffalo and have. And actually, at this point, the archaeologists are kind of stumped about what must have happened next, because the amount they got, and there's the bones of the buffalo, so we've got a pretty good theory that it worked. There's too much meat there for them to have possibly eaten, and so there's this interesting question whether this was even for food hunting or for some kind of ritual purpose. But what's linking back to Rousseau is the thought that, again, if the archaeologists are right, you couldn't possibly have done this alone. If you didn't know what the other people were going to do, your choices were, go and join in a mass hunt and hope for the best, but you might end up starving if not enough other people turn up, or go and get some nuts and berries and you at least have food for the day. Okay. How this relates back to the game I just put on is if you think of G as the option of going and gathering nuts and berries, and H as the option of going and hunting for wild animals, then if the other person does the same thing as you, you'll be best off doing whatever you did, and you'd rather you both went hunting. But if you think it's a coin flip what the other person will do, then your expected utility maximizing is going to be from gathering berries. So I don't know what to do in these situations. Rousseau thought it was kind of obvious that people would just sort of not look out for, would just assume that they were just going to starve if they tried to join in these team efforts here. I don't know if that's particularly plausible bit of anthropology, but it's sort of an interesting question. Here's what I do want to say about this game. Decisive theories tend to, and it turns out they don't universally, but every plausible decisive theory that I know of gives the same answer to every problem that satisfies those 4 constraints that Nevin put into the chat. Now, as I said, this isn't actually like a logical necessity. You could imagine a theory that didn't do this. I'm only going to talk today about theories that do. And cool fact, this actually doesn't restrict much of the target at all, as far as I can tell. Every decisive theory in literature says the same thing about all of these problems. Okay. So where was I at? Oh, yeah, right. Now, the problem that the sort of internal game, the one that Amsterdam faces, the one with the sort of 6034 that I put into the chat back at 6:14, 26 minutes ago. has this structure. In that case, the choice A is the hunting option. It's the one with the higher payout but more risky. And choice B is the gathering option. But let's think about what things look like from the perspective of the person who has to choose before the demon announces what they're going to do, whose choice is this conditional choice. What am I going to do if the demon opts in? Well, some of what goes on, some of that for them is easy. So their choices, if I write A and the demon predicts that if I write A and the demon predicts that I write A, I get $6. And if I write A and the demon predicts, I get $3. Right, those things don't change, because if the demon predicts that I'll do A, then the demon will opt in, thinking that they'll get $4 rather than $1, and I will. And if I opt in, then the payouts don't change. But let's imagine the demon thinks I'm going to write B in my envelope. What's going to happen then? Well, now the demon's going to think to themselves, this is too bad. If I opt in, he's going to choose B. If he chooses B, I'll get $1. If I don't bother playing the game, I'll get $1. That's kind of too bad. It's going to be the same either way. So I'll flip a coin to see what I'm going to do. So if I write B, I should think it's 50-50 whether the demon will opt in or opt out. So I don't know what I'm going to get, but I do know the expected value of what I'm going to get. And even I can do the expected value calculations here. It's just half of 100 plus half of the original payouts. So if I write A, if I write B and demon predicts B, get expected return. So if I write B and the demon predicts I write B, I get an expected return of $52. There's a 50-50 chance the demon will opt out and I'll get 100, and a 50-50 chance the demon will opt in and I'll get 4, and halfway between 100 and 4 is 52. And what is it if I write B? Sorry, if I write A, demon predicts B, I get expected return of 50. And if I write down A while the demon predicts B, my expected return is $50. And there's 50-50 chance the demon will opt in and I'll get 50, and a 50-50 chance I'll opt out and the demon, sorry, I'll either get $100 or nothing, and it's a coin flip which one I get. Okay, let's put that in a little graphic. I had the graphic here somewhere. Where was it? So here's the game. Here's the game for the person who has to choose before the demon makes their choice. Here's the one for if the demon chooses. If you have to choose for the demon for after the demon makes the choice, didn't work. Damn it. My attempts at technology are failing me miserably. But what I want to go back to, that's sort of the one at the first of the 644 ones. Note that game also has the structure of one of these stag hunts, but now it's this. There's still two equilibria. There's still one equilibria better than another. There's still one of the other equilibria, the other option, the one with the less good equilibria, is now the safer choice. Right? So for option, if I choose A, I'll get either 6 or 50. So if I'm unsure what the demon will do, it's the midpoint of 6 and 50 is 28. If I choose option B and I don't know what the demon will do, the midpoint of 3 and 52 is 27.50. I thought I'd avoided $half. So what we've got here, the game that you play, if you choose before the demon announces, is a stag hunt, just like what you play after, but it's with the roles reversed. Now option A is the safe but less rewarding choice, and option B is the slightly more risky but slightly more rewarding choice. So my computer just changed color because it's sunset here. So any theory that says you should do the same thing in all stag hunts will violate what I was calling the core premise. It will say to choose A if you after the demon opts in, but it will say to choose B if you're having to write in the envelope what to do if the demon opts in. Okay, let's sort of very quickly sort of note why that's like why everyone actually does that. So what I've tried, what I've tried to argue for so far is that any theory that gives the same answer to all of these stag hunt games, any theory that says you should do D in all of them, or you should do H in all of them, any such theory will end up contradicting itself in this kind of puzzle, or slightly more precisely, it'll violate the thing I was calling core premise back at 622, that you should make the same choice before and after. Let's now quickly note that, because now the rest of it is basically just doing some math, that lots of theories do fall into that camp. So first, so when it's helpful to pull up why don't I put it? No, it's okay. Where was I at? Oh, right. Evidential decision theory, for instance, will say you should always hunt. The evidential decision theorist thinks, look, if you hunt, the demon will predict that you hunt. That gets you the higher return. Done. But that will say that that Amsterdam, the person who plays my game the normal way, should do A, and Brussels, the person who has to write in advance what they're going to do, should choose B. But it's not just the evidential decision theorist who says that. Plenty of people who are two boxers in Newcomb's problem will say that as well. So, for instance, Richard Jeffrey, when he didn't want to be a causal decision theorist, right? He didn't in Jeffrey's the second edition of Logic of Decision, where he adjusts his theory to make it a two-boxer theory, says, well, what you should do is you should restrict your attention to those possible choices that are self-ratifying, that they essentially are equilibria, and you should apply evidential decision theory, but only choosing between them. So in the Stag Hunt games, that will also say to hunt, because both choices are self-ratifying. So the constraint that says knock out the unratifiable ones won't do anything, you'll be back in evidential decision theory. You don't have to get to that way from evidential decision theory. Frank Hartzenius has a view that starts off with thinking about starts off as basically a causal decision theorist, but wants to sort of have something more substantive to say about death in Damascus type problems. And what he says is basically, well, when there's multiple equilibria, you should choose the one with the highest return. But that actually turns out to end up being pretty similar to Jeffrey's view. And it also says you should also hunt in all of these cases. And all of these theories, I think, will violate, I think all of these theories will, in the example I gave, violate this core premise. It will say to do a different thing before and after you're told what the demon has done. In recent years, there's been a flood of There's been at least 4 theories developed that say the other thing. And 2 of the people saying them here, Dimitri and David, both have theories that say you should always gather in these cases. And Rafe Wedgwood has a theory that also says that, and Abelard Podgorski, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, also has a theory that says that. Now, the 4 of them differ a lot in why they think you should always gather, and in in how to extend the intuition behind always gathering to multiple cases. And I'm not going to go through all 4 cases or 4 theories. I will note that remember I said earlier I gave 3 arguments for the core premise, that it was just intuitive that the people were answering the same question, that the sure thing principle required them to answer the same way, and that if you said they gave different answers, then you would end up saying weird things about paying money to not get information. Some of the theories that say you should gather, when you extend them to don't end up saying you should pay to avoid information. So that criticism doesn't apply to all theories, but I think the other two do. Anyway, they'll all say they say to always gather in these cases. So they'll say that if you're inside the game, if you're choosing between the 6 and 0 option or the 3 and 4 option, you should choose the 3-4 option. But if you have to choose before you're told what the demon's done, then you should, well, now the gathering option is option A. So they'll still say opposite things about what to do in before and after the demon talks. It'll just be the opposite, this other way around to what the evidential decision theorists and some of the other causal decision theorists say. Okay, I wonder if that's about enough. Is there much more? So, in the longer version of the paper, what I do is try and argue that there aren't going to be any ways to sort of slide between these options and actually, as I said, the math gets more complicated, but the philosophy does not get more interesting because there's a reason no one had tried to develop a decision theory where you did different things in different of these Stag Hunt games. It was incredible. It was hard enough to find a sort of mathematical formalization of such theories, and if there was a good philosophical defense of them, it was beyond me. But I think actually this kind of argument generalizes to all possible decisive theories. And I think that the lesson from all this is that very roughly that Jeffrey's theory was half right, that the right decision theory should say you should choose one of the ratifiable options. You should choose one of the options such that conditional on choosing it, you're happy to have chosen it. And then it should stop. And there's nothing more for the right decision theory to say. And in cases like these, that should be like, yeah, do what you like. It's all fine. Now, that's what my positive view is. I should just also want to end by noting, I have not come close to arguing for this. There are, because the thing I just said there about saying, find the decisive options and stop is a really, really indecisive theory. So what I've argued for in this paper is that the right theory should be indecisive. It should sometimes say, there's multiple good choices. It's a lot further, it's another several steps down the line to say that there's so many cases that fall into that camp. But that's what this is part, that's the hope where this is going to be going. Okay, let's stop with that and take a short break and come back for questions in a bit.
All right, let's thank our speaker. So we will take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 1 minute to the hour. Okay, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please send me a direct message in the chat and I will add you to the queue. Our first question is from Dimitri Gallo.
Thanks so much, Brian. Awesome paper, awesome talk. Can I just ask real quick about the thing you said right at the end when you said the view is choose a causally ratifiable option and then stop? Does that mean that an option is permissible just in case it's given positive probability in some equilibrium? Am I thinking about it the right way?
No, I have weird views on mixed strategies. I mean,
okay.
Actually, yeah, that's the strongest thing I would like to believe. I'm not quite sure I'm fully there to doing that. Yeah, it's certainly if I certainly want to defend the view that any pure equilibrium is choosable. For mixed strategies, I don't know, maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, let's say yes for the sake of the question.
I mean, that was just meant to be a kind of like quick clarificatory question, but so maybe I want to hear more about it. But can I ask about assumption?
I've come back to, maybe I do think the answer to that is yes, because if Actually, no, this is going to be way off track. I'm really not quite sure what I want to say about these cases. So I don't know what to say. So I don't really have a fixed view on what to say about the cycling cases and whatnot.
Okay, sorry. Can I ask about the
core premise?
The core premise. There was two ways that you were talking about it. I just wanted to check first. There was a kind of intrapersonal version of it and an interpersonal version where like one is that Amsterdam and Brussels should, assuming that there's decisiveness, they should make the same thing. Another is that like, suppose that, Brussels writes down the paper and then learns that he doesn't have to show up for the appointment for the second dose, and then discovers that the demon is playing the game. So there's another version you can endorse, which is to say that learning that doesn't give him any reason to change his mind from what he wrote on the paper. Like maybe he could capriciously, but learning that doesn't give him any reason to. Is that something you also want to endorse? Okay, so it's like one way of thinking about what's going on is that learning that the demon has opted into the game shouldn't give you any, it doesn't give you any relevant information for deciding between A and B. And so that seems very plausible to me, but when I'm sort of thinking about it, I'm recognizing it's going to do, when I get that information, one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to shift my probability distribution over what the demon has predicted, or I'm going to shift my probability distribution over whether I'm going to choose A or B. And if it's the first one that I shift my probability distribution over what the demon's predicted, then I start to sort of lose the intuition that it's not relevant information. It feels like, oh, it's telling me something about, what state of the world I'm in, and choosing between A and B is going to make a difference with respect to what I get in those two states of the world. So it feels more like relevant information. And then if it's the option where I'm shifting my probability distribution, then I'm kind of, I'd like to hear more about why it's sort of like it's not relevant to how to choose between A and B, but it is giving me a reason to think I'm more likely to choose A or more likely to choose B. Is that intelligible?
So there's three possible things to say about this. One is, I think I could futz with it in a way that made it. I think I could futz with the setup in such a way that that got around the worry by imagine a version of the game where the demon is like hyper reliable, 99.999 whatever, about A versus B when you get into the game, but only like 95% reliable at like making the opt-in, opt-out choice in their best interests. I think the numbers would still work if they did that. But let's try not doing that, because let's try to say a couple of things. So that was the first one. I might be able to fuck, because I sort of do. The point of that background futzing was there's a thing that I slid through here, which Dimitri is rightly picking up on, which is, remember I said for a decision problem, you have to specify the conditional probabilities of the states conditional on the choices. It's really crucial that we have those, and it's really crucial, and it's not always like made clear, but it's crucial for these prediction type games that work both ways. Right? So, some presentations of Newcomb's problem are sort of sloppy and hand wavy on this, but it's really important that the person going into it thinks conditional on my choosing A, the demon is super likely to predict A, and conditional on my choosing B, the demon is super likely to predict B. And what's hard about my case is I need them to be thinking that after the demon has made the opt-in, opt-out choice. Right? And see, because you could have a demon who was like super reliable, and you even think they're sort of bi-directionally super reliable, but you think that, all of, if you might think that if they once you see the first choice they make, then you've lost your evidence that they're still super reliable in both directions. And I think making them be very, very good at the opt-in, opt-out choice and super fantastically good at the A-B choice avoids that particular problem. But in this case, but there's two stronger things I can say about this. If it's the probabilities of what the demons, if it makes a change to the probabilities of what the demon does, I kind of think that the person who was making the conditional choice should have already factored that in. That when you're choosing, what do I want to do if the demon opts in? I think, I'm an old like Ramsey test guy. I think you like imagine that the demon has opted in and then think, what do I do about A versus B after that? So if that's evidence relevant to your choice, then I think both people should assess it. And if it affects the probabilities of what choices you're going to make, I'm worried I'm going to mess up the math here, but I don't think the theories that let those probabilities in are decisive in the precise sense I want. So here's an example of an indecisive theory, not my indecisive theory. I'm way more indecisive than this, but I think this is what Dimitri might have in mind here. Here's one way of solving these predictor problems. You think for a bit about the problem. Given your own dispositions, tickles, whatever, and your knowledge of the demon's accuracies, you assign probabilities to the various states, and you maximize expected utility, just like we teach like high school students to do. Done. And that's still a first approximation my colleague Jim Joyce is here. That's not going to tell you, that's not going to give an answer to the question, what does one do in a stag hunt type game? It is going to give any person playing those games advice about what to do. It just might give different advice to different people once they introspect and think about how likely it is they're going to choose different options. I haven't set this up to be an argument against that kind of view. And I think I'd have to, I think it probably also works against that kind of view, but I'm not quite sure. And I don't, that's not one of my targets here yet. That's the short version. So if that's why you're worried about it, that's a worry for the next paper.
Nicholas Smith is next.
Thanks. Sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, thanks, Brian. I don't really want to object to the core premise as stated in the online version that I clicked on, which is quite specific, but I think I want to object to something more general you said in defense of it, like why it's intuitive. This idea that when we ask you, what would you do if A, or well, no, you use A for something else, but what would you do if X? And then if we wait until X happens and then ask, what do you want to do? That we're asking the same question and hence your answer should be the same. I think maybe we're asking the same question in some sense, but I don't think your answer necessarily needs to be the same. So I think that imagine a kind of some sort of resource conscious decision theory that says, well, if you've got time to think about the answer, then calculate expected utility. But if you don't, then just maxim in or something like that. And so suppose you present me with a bunch of options.
Okay.
And I don't have time to work out what I would do in option X and what I would do in option Y. So I just do maximum. And maybe there's one correct answer in that context for what I should do if X. Applying maximum, let's do this thing. But then later you say to me, look, X has happened, what do you want to do? And now I'm like, okay, well now I've got time to work it out more carefully. And I work out, no, I actually want to do this other thing. That seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Yeah, I agree. That seems right. Yes, I possibly should have thought of that. I've got like there's other thing I was working on with doing making heavy use of resource-sensitive decision theories to solve a different problem. Yeah, that sounds right, and especially in the case where, especially in the case where X is a pretty obscure situation, then your resource-sensitive theory might be it's like, whatever, I don't care. It's like I'm not gonna spend cycles on like on a 1 in a million shot. Once the 1 in a million shot happens, you spend some cycles on it. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think what I want to say to sort of for the argument of the paper is that the optimal answer to the two questions is the same, but you're right that a perfectly reasonable person might answer them differently. Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a really good point. So I should say that resource-sensitive decision theory is going to be different to what everyone has been doing. I mean, it won't. Sometimes you will pass up like sure gain in resource-sensitive decision theory. Imagine here's a version of it I've been worrying about a bit. I give you a 100-digit number. I tell you truthfully, and you can trust me, that it's the product of two 50-digit primes. And I say, I want you to guess what the third digit of the larger of the factors is. And if you get it right, I'll give you $100. But if you don't want to do that, I'll just give you $50, and you can have $50 for sure, or you can play this guessing game to get $100. And every theory in the literature will say, oh no, you should take the $100. It's like mathematically, it's probability 1. I mean, what the right answer is, right? But obviously, a sort of sensible theory would say, no, that's like ridiculous. It's not, we know what factoring 100-digit numbers looks like. It costs a lot of money, more than $50. Just take the money. So yeah, in my defense, you're right that the way I put it just doesn't work in a resource-sensitive context. Decision theory will look very, very different in that context too. And hopefully what I said will still be true about the sort of ideal case.
Thanks.
I'm next on the queue. I think I'm going to be poking at the same place, and I don't know how much this will add to Dimitri and Nick's comments. But I was wondering about the first argument for the core premise that these are the same problem that the two agents are facing. So I was thinking of a different reason I think that they might not be the same problem, which is that you have evidence about like self-locating evidence. Your self-locating evidence is different in the two cases, like where you are, what's going to happen. The demon is going to make a choice, but now you're after the choice. In the one case, in the other case, you're before the choice. And at least some views about self-locating evidence say that you should do different things or have different credences depending on where you are. I don't know if such views are plausible. I haven't thought about how to combine them here. So it's more of an inchoate idea that, well, there does seem to be something different. So yeah, that's another reason that
there is something different. That's right. Okay, so let's see if that can go through. The first kind of response to that is, I'm worried that this is going to sound that you feel sort of cheating. I set up the problem by saying, oh, look, all these different theories actually fall into the scope of what I'm going to argue against. I'm going to like start tinkering back and say, oh, actually, this one doesn't quite fall into it. I think if that kind of self-locating evidence matters, then we're going to want to get off the boat very early about what our formulation of a decision problem is, because you're going to, you know, and I mean, this is another way in which the thing I was saying at the end was like way beyond what I've actually argued for here. So this might be sort of helpful to sort of step back and sort of say where I think this sort of things are philosophically. You can take the argument of this paper as meant as being an attack on the conjunction of the formulation of what it is for something to be a decision problem from the very start of the paper, with the idea that decision theory should like pick a unique problem. And what I was hand waving it at the end was to say, I actually think that's a perfectly good way to understand decision problems and the problem is decisiveness. But what I haven't argued for here is against people who want to say, no, decision theory should be decisive. It's just that Brian left out one or two clauses on what the formulation of a decision problem is here. Now, why do I think this is going to matter for what you said? Well, because I don't see how self-locating evidence could matter to any of the four things that I listed as being a criteria for a decision problem. As I said to Dimitri, you know, there's theories like Ben's that are sort of relatively decisive, but think you need something else. You need at least like a prior probability for your, you know, over what choices you're going to make or something. And that actually does seem kind of self-locating. So maybe in those kind of theories, we'll still need to do a bit of work about how the sort of temporal aspect of self-location matters, but at least it's like, it's the right kind of thing, right? And so, I mean, you're right that so the short version of my answer is if self-locating evidence matters, it better matter somewhere. And it's not clear I've left any hooks for it to matter, but maybe the thing to say is, that was your mistake, wasn't it? That was my mistake, wasn't it? I should have put an extra hook in. It is still going to be a little tricky, and it's going to be a slightly weird. I mean, it is worth sort of thinking through how it might come about. I mean, so if self-locating evidence matters, it doesn't matter to those four things. What matters is something else. So what we want is at this point is a decision theory that says, well, I write down problems like Newcomb's problem or this Stag Hunt problem or whatever, and the theorist then says, well, says to the player, well, have you had any chats with the demon recently? What happened in those conversations? Or has the demon done anything else recently that's not incorporated in these conditional probabilities? And actually, I'm not entirely, you know, there are views in game theory where you should where those kind of things, factors would matter. It would be a really different picture of decision theory from what we've had so far. And then if it's the reason I put those four conditions down was not just that they were enough to get doing what I was going to do. It's that it's really common in journal articles on decision theory for someone to just have a little inset box saying, here's my problem, and they'll write up some text for a problem. And the problem doesn't specify anything notable beyond those four things. It does always specify those four things, but it doesn't always specify much beyond. But yeah, no, a decision theory that gave self-locating evidence that a place could have something to say. Sure.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think I was just thinking dialectically, like with the first argument is a kind of informal one, at least as I understood it when you presented it, that, well, these seem like the same problem. It doesn't seem like they're facing different problems. And so if you can just identify one or two things that it seems like, well, these could be relevantly different. I don't have a decision theory that says they're different. And then, when we look at the decision theories, then it might be, like you say, that the extant ones all give the same verdict. But then it seems like that informal argument is not doing the work, that what's doing the work is, well, when we look at these extant decision theories, they all give the wrong result in this case.
I mean, I still like the formal argument. I mean, I still want to say that I still like the informal argument. I mean, I think this sounds like a. I mean, I don't think it's decisive. I mean, I think if you had a theory that sort of, so I mean, very, very, very big back picture to all this, and sort of to sort of relate to what I was trying to do with that. Back to to a paper I gave back in Melbourne 20-something years ago. The thing about decision theory is everyone says unintuitive things. The Ellsberg paradox is hard. Newcomb paradox is hard. The LA paradox is hard. I mean, you know, these theories are all going to say like weird things at some time, at some time or another. And so so first choice point you've got to do you want to minimize the number of cases you say weird things about, or do you want to minimize the number of principles you say weird things about? And the story of this paper is to try and, you know, I think things like principles like these cases look kind of alike and it'd be kind of embarrassing to treat them differently, things we should hold on to. But, you know, other people think that you should start more with cases. I'm still, I'm still going to hold on to that, even if, as you said, it's not a watertight argument. If you've got a theory that says hey, here's why self-locating belief matters, and be like, okay, it didn't feel like it should matter, but let's you know, evaluate it holistically. But I'm not retracting the argument in any sense. I'm just saying, yeah, still think it'd be a bad making feature, but every theory's got bad making features, so who knows?
Okay, David Barnett has a question. And after that, the queue is open. So please let me know if you also have a question.
Hey, Brian, that was a great talk. I'm still processing stuff for Dimitri. So I'm not sure how well formed this question is. So I was thinking, you know, when I hear your example and I read your arguments for the core premise, I definitely feel the pull of it. I was thinking of an example. I was trying to like think of a more stripped down example, and if there's an important difference with your example, I need some help understanding what the difference is. Because to me, like what Dimitri and I want to say about this example seems intuitive. So let me just give you the example. So Amsterdam is presented with a choice between boxes A and B. If he was predicted to choose A, the demon put $10 in A and $0 in B. And if predicted to do B, it was $0 and $11 in B. So so the B is a little more ratifying than A is. And you know, Dimitri and I both want to say Amsterdam should pick B. And then Brussels, starts out the same way. But if Brussels was predicted to do box B, then the demon just flipped a coin and either put $11 in B or just like didn't put any money in anything and deposited a bunch of money in his bank account if you want. But that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant on my view, whether there was some separate payoff. If the coin landed tails is irrelevant. You know, the effect of the choice is going to be $0 if Brussels chooses B, if the coin landed heads. And so to me, intuitively, it's like, oh yeah, it really seems like that those are two different decision problems. So maybe you reject the intuition, or maybe I've missed some important feature of the.
Oh, I mean, I do think those are different problems. I think. I wonder if we're going to be able to recreate them though. So, but let's try and make this halfway. So, I mean, this is why I sort of wanted to, well, actually, no, a couple of things. I mean, I don't think either of the arguments I gave, sort of the Ramsey test argument or the sure thing argument, will be good arguments for thinking those are the same problems as stated. So it's not like, you know, one of them was like being asked to like make a conditional choice and the other was asked to make the choice knowing that the condition was met. And the sure thing's a little trickier actually, because I kind of worry about this one, to be honest. This is that. So that was the first thing I would. So that was the first thought was, you know, the core premise was, you know, it might have been mislabeled. It wasn't meant to be driven by those two considerations. That a conditional question, and Nick's pointed out the resource point is well taken here, but that the optimal answer to a conditional question and the optimal answer to the same unconditional question after having been told the condition is met should be the same, and that you shouldn't make the choice if you would make the opposite choice conditional on either P or not P. And I don't think that's going to happen in this case. So what David's got is a coordination game, right? Where you know, whatever you do, it's going to be good. The demon's going to predict you did it. You're going to get some money, but it's an asymmetric coordination game. So there's going to be a point where you get more from, you know, this coordination rather than that coordination. And then the question is, what happens if you sort of start with the payouts and change and change and change and change around? And I don't know. I don't think I've given an argument against that.
Could I try one more time? I agree. I need to complicate my example a little bit.
Yeah.
So for both Amsterdam and Brussels, the way it all started was the demon was gonna, if they're predicted to choose A, it's $10 in A, 0 in B. If predicted to do B, a coin's gonna get tossed. If it lands heads, then it's 11 in B and 0 in A. If it lands tails, then it's nothing in either box. Okay. So then Amsterdam is told, in effect is told, see, I still think I'm not quite getting it. But the idea is Amsterdam's told the coin didn't land tails, and Brussels is not. And I'm thinking in your example something about the way Brussels is presented with the choice is in effect telling him. The way Amsterdam is presented with the choice is in effect telling him the same thing. It's telling him the coin didn't land tails. So that's why, but I'm still, that doesn't say what specifically I object to in the two arguments.
Oh, no, this is no, and I think I've seen it now, and I think I'm going to be bullet biting on this. So let's try and step back a little bit from this. When I was setting up the Stag Hunt games, I said that there are these two big considerations that people use to choose between equilibria. One, at least in these 2x2 games, like how these considerations generalize to n by n cases is very, very hard. But there's really, but in the 2x2 cases, there's really only two things that are on the market. One is you choose the equilibria with the higher payout. Second one is you choose the equilibria that's safer, that has a better return if you thought the demon was flipping a coin. And what your case points out is those two considerations don't have to pull apart. In your original $10, $11 case, they both push in the same direction, which is why you get the intuition. That's what you should do. And I was mentioning that you and Dimitri are on one side of the Stag Hunt, and Richard Jeffrey and Frank Katzini's on the other. But all four of you agree on what to do on that problem. And but I think if you if you run that game through my machinery, I think you get the same. I think you will still get the same argument. Okay, so I would need to sit down with a notepad to do this.
Yeah.
But here's a view that I haven't seen anyone defend, but it would be interesting to defend, which is to say, in the games I was calling Stag Hunt games, yeah, fine, Brian's right, you can do whatever you like. But in these games in 2x2 games where the considerations point in the same way, then there's a one right choice to make. You should take the $11, not the $10. And I hadn't thought about whether my theory, a bit of historical background. This kind of history. There was a bit of a weird interest in that. So, from a game theory perspective, the thing we're doing here is what they're called problems of equilibrium selection. And there was a flurry of interest in this in the 1980s and 90s. And the main player in this was John Hassani. And Hassani changed his mind in the middle of this debate. He at one stage thought you should do the pick the one with the highest payout, and then change his mind to the view that you and Dimitri have, that you should pick the safer choice. And I've never quite understood what the reason was for the change, but it's there. But a view that said, well, yeah, if either Hassani's early view or late view says the same thing, then go with that. And I think what you're suggesting is that the kind of machinery I'm using would argue against even that kind of view, and that's would be a striking consequence of the machinery. And I'm committed to saying, yep, that's what I believe. And if someone wanted to take that to be an overgeneration worry, that would be a reasonable consideration. I mean, as you suspected, I would still ask. So okay, so where does the Ramsey test argument fail? Where does the sure thing argument fail? But it's true that this machinery might actually prove a lot, and that might be a reason to be skeptical of it.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Jillian Russell has a question.
Oh, I was thinking maybe Hassani just got closer to retirement. Decided to go for the safer option.
Yeah.
Okay, so
the age works, I think.
This is like just a big picture question. So suppose I accept the conclusions that decision theory should be indecisive. Initially that sounds a little depressing. Like decision theory can do less for me than I hoped it might, and maybe even that reason can do less for me in figuring out how to act in the future than I thought it might. Is that how you think of it? Is that the right way to think of it?
That is how I think of it, yeah. And I think that is how I think of it. That there's just that you might, I think the history of how this played in game theory should make you feel a little better about what happened, because Hassani is one of the all-time greats, but no, people got interested in this for a bit, but it didn't really catch on as a theory. What happened, and it was a little bit coincidental, but not entirely coincidental, was that people started saying, well, look, it doesn't really feel like reason is going to tell us which of these equilibria these rational players are going to end up at. Maybe the only thing to do is to go and look at where rational players end up when you do stuff. So, the timeline for when you start seeing a move away from really high church mathematics as being the center of it, and to the sort of more experimental turn, kind of lines up. And I don't know enough of I'm not enough of like a sociologist of economics something to know what the causal story is there. There's some reason to think the causal story is right. There is at least some causal connection there. So I think if I'm right, it closes off a sort of a priori-ish way of answering certain kinds of questions and opens up a kind of fascinating range of empirical questions, namely, how do rational people make choices when presented with these situations where there are multiple rational things to do? And so, one door closes, another opens. But you're right, there is sort of a slightly depressing take on it. And the most I can say is, and to be honest, I think the very empirically sort of empirical game theory of the 21st century is actually didn't feel like it's running into quite the same dead ends that some of the sort of the very, very a priori-ish stuff of the 80s and 90s felt like it was running into. So I don't want to say that I've turned into like X-Fi Brian, but I think there's an interesting there is a like a natural path forward here, which is to just go and be like, oh, okay, we can't deduce that how rational humans will react from the fact of their rationality. So let's see what we can figure out from the fact of their humanity. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
John Hawthorne.
I haven't really digested all this, Brian. I really just want you to help me out by. So here's a much simpler protocol where it feels like evidential decision theory is getting it right. So we got a perfect predictor, but the game might be called off. The only way the game will be called off is if they predict B. Then someone will flip a coin, and the game show host will flip a coin to decide whether to call the game off. In early doesn't know whether the game's going to be called off. They can choose A and B, and I think the payouts are the same. So if you don't know whether the game's called off, evidential decision theory certainly says, well, pick B because it gives you a 50% chance. And if the game's called off, you get 100. It's the same payouts as before. So if the game's called off, you get 100. You think, well, if the game's called off, I get 100. It seems like just totally obvious with a perfect predictor and those payouts, you choose B in the early situation. In late, you've learnt the game's on. It just seems totally obvious you choose A if you know the predictor's perfect in an evidential decision theory. And that just seems exactly the right results. And then if we relax the predictor from 100% to 99%, it'd be shocking to me if that's, if my expectation of their reliability just dropped a bit. It would be surprising to me if that made a radical difference. So I'd like to start with step one. You see how I'm reasoning.
No, I actually do want to like insist that the 100 versus 99 is the difference here, I think.
Do you agree in the perfect predictor case?
I mean, maybe, I think possibly, I don't. So here's why I think it makes a difference. I think it's a presupposition of any of these problems that you can make any of the choices. I mean, in the sort of ability modal sense of can, that, and moreover, that you can make any of the choices in any of the states. And I think that if you don't have that presupposition, it's an ill-formed problem. And I worry about that in the 100% case, you're violating that constraint. And I don't even know what to say in those cases. I mean, I possibly could go along with it. So I mean, I've been worrying. This came up with topic because people here have been worrying about, Arif Ahmed's cases about betting on the past and the laws of nature in deterministic worlds. You get the same kind of thing happen, and he thinks that these very strong intuitions for evidential decision theory, and I sort of want to say that you get these kind of cases where it's really not obvious that the ability modal can claim is true, and I just don't think these sort of grids we draw make any sense in cases where that presupposition isn't satisfied. So I do, yeah. So I do sort of think that the perfection versus imperfection difference matters.
But if we change it to where the predictor always gets it right, except when they've had sausages for breakfast and they have that once a month.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah.
Then you think the evidential thing's clearly getting the wrong thing. If an advanced almost certainly they haven't had sausage, almost.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is coming back to what I was saying to Nevin earlier. I totally agree that if you just take the cases one at a time and ask what the intuitive thing to do is, then you can get then you'll get a violation of my core premise. And I'm like, yeah, fine. So to step back from that philosophically though, here's a funny thing about contemporary decision theory. It's and there was a nice blanked on his name. There was a nice survey article that implicitly, in analysis a couple of years back, that implicitly made this point. There's two big parts to decision theory. One part is the part I've been playing in today, the part involving predictors and and stuff. The other part is the stuff where the most important figure is Lara Buchak, where the questions are all about is sort of orthodox expected utility theory the right way to approach risk, or should we use some kind of non-standard theory like Lara wants? Okay. Interesting fact about evidential decision theorists: they typically, when they write down their theories, look like they're not on Lara's side of that debate. They have totally orthodox views about what to do in sort of regular non-predictor based risk cases. They'll even explicitly write that down sometimes. But Lara's theory gets much more intuitive verdicts about a whole bunch of cases than the orthodox theory does. What it gets wrong, I think, is that it violates some very plausible principles of the form, hey, questions like this and questions like that should be answered kind of the same way. Not just that, one of the plausible principles it gets wrong is the sure thing principle that I was using in this kind of case. So I actually don't think the standard evidential decision theorist, if they make the kind of moves you're making there, I think they're doomed. Now, if you mix evidential decision theory with, Buchak's theory of choice under risk, then I'd be like, yeah, I'd like the sure thing principle. I'm happy to live with unintuitive things. But I think it's kind of interesting that the style of argument you're giving there, if applied consistently, won't get you anything like mainstream evidential decision theory. It'll get you some sort of unorthodox thing. That's not a reductio. I mean, Lara's view is pretty interesting, but I think we should make it. There's the choice point of, do you want to go case by case, saying, isn't it obvious you should do A here? Is it obvious you should do B here? Or do you want to start with things like the sure thing principle? Is a choice we should make very early and be consistent about it.
All right, well, I think that's our time. So let's thank Brian again.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you all very much.